It's episode number 58 of This Week in Creationism. I'm your host, Joel Duff, and I take a look at the headlines in the world of creationism from the past week. In this case, the past couple weeks. We've got canine training at the Ark Encounter. Ken Ham talks about how there's been two historic events in Christendom. I wonder what he could be talking about. I'm also going to read a little bit of an Ark Convention Manifesto. We've got that and some Ken Ham tweets and actually a whole bunch of Answers in Genesis stuff this week. So we got all that coming up next. Hey, welcome back. I know it's been a while. Been very busy teaching genetics lab, and looking at about 100 curriculum proposals for general education, natural science courses. That is definitely filling up my time. But we gotta, catch up on the world of creationism. So here we are. Let's just start with a couple of sorted items. Things that I just came across and stashed away, thinking, these could be interesting to talk about before we get a little more serious. All right. Then we'll come back and finish it off with a couple fun items as well. So here's a little item from Ken Ham. So he's tweeting about the Answers in Genesis streaming platform called Answers.tv. And this is something that started several years ago, but he's right. It has been growing. And I've been trying to remind people that Answers in Genesis isn't a creation science ministry, right? It's a complete Christian apologetics ministry. And it includes them just having purchased a $31 million building that's going to be sort of their corporate headquarters, and it's going to house their school, but also it's going to house a bunch of their multimedia stuff. So their multimedia presence is going to continue to grow. They have created a lot of video content. They've also purchased other Christian video content, and they've created their own streaming site. Which you can subscribe to, and for your family and your homeschooling kids and so forth. So it's an alternative media site, and I expect that to continue to grow. I think one of the visions for Answers in Genesis for Ken Ham and those who follow him, including this Martin Iles, who's coming and will be, I'm sure, integral in this process of developing video content for this site. I expect that it will continue to grow and become more and more influential. So just pointing this out because it's just important to remember that these are the other sort of ministries that are kind of coming along the side at the same time. And this kind of goes with the theme today, because we're going to see that Answers in Genesis is a partial owner of a corporate jet, right? Answers in Genesis has basically a convention business going on. Answers in Genesis has partial ownership, or it's a little unclear exactly what the relationship is, with a hotel that's been built right next to their property, which of course they are, probably collecting some revenue there through some other entity, right? So Answers in Genesis isn't just a single entity, but it's a bunch of different sort of non-profit organizations, or maybe some of them are for profit as well. So it's a conglomeration, and you need to think of it that way. All right, I just mentioned that Answers in Genesis is in the convention business. So here just popped up, I think, yesterday. They're going to have another canine conference in 2024. And you're wondering, well, what's a canine conference? Do canines also need to be, hear the gospel message? Yes, no, that's not what it's about. It's about training, service dogs. But this isn't it's an outreach, no doubt about it, but it's really a opportunity to use their facility in the middle of wintertime in January. January 6th through 9th, not the most popular time to come to the Ark Encounter. And so they're renting out a portion of their conference facilities. And of course, they hope that some people that come to this conference will maybe take a look at the Ark Encounter as well. I'm sure they'll have to pay to actually enter the actual Ark itself. They'll be on the grounds, but in order to get in the Ark, you have to pay the extra price. So you see here that this is a $200 for individuals to register to bring their dogs. And let me show you what the information about this is. The Answers in Genesis Department of Public Safety will be hosting its second Canine conference this January. right? What does it do? It seeks to help canine handlers from law enforcement and private business fields expand their training, handling, and performance. Included in the conference, you see here, lectures pertaining to canines and their use, canine first aid, imprinting of various odors, blah, 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 blah. There's nothing here about learning about creation science or the gospel or any kind of a apologetics ministry type component here. It's simply, we're having our facility used for this particular thing. Now, of course, you're here at the Ark Encounter and you have to park. I'm guessing they probably have to pay the parking fee in order to park, because you have to board a bus at the Ark Encounter after you park, and they take the bus over to the portion of the facility where the Ark Encounter is and where the convention center, or it really is a convention center. That's not actually what they call it. I can't remember what they call it now, but it's essentially what it acts as. There's a little thing that kind of bothers me about this. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but something that routinely bothers me about Answers in Genesis, and that is their policy for putting their employees to work on the Sabbath. Sabbath keepers, resting on the Sabbath is not something that's a high priority for Answers in Genesis and Ken Ham, which I've always found a little surprising. Now, I understand that in the New Testament that there are a lot of New Testament Christians, and especially Baptists, who probably don't have the most literal view of the Sabbath rest, which is funny to say since Ken Ham's all about reading the Bible in a very straightforward fashion. Clearly, he has to interpret the scriptures in order to allow for his employees to be generating income for the Ark and for his ministry on the Sabbath. Now, he would say that they're not open till noon, right? Go to church and then you can come after that. But those employees have to be there in the morning to prep things for that day. So, for example, here there's a catered welcoming dinner, right, which occurs on a Sunday, and this is not for Christians. This is for just this group that's renting the facility to use it for this particular purpose, and it's not at all a Christian ministry or for a Christian purpose. And so they are making money on the Sabbath. I don't know. It bothers me. That's not, I know that a lot of you out there that Christians aren't bothered by this. This would be like the number one thing that bothers you about the Ark Encounter if you're not a young Earth Creationist fan. But for me personally, it's something that I've always found to be just inconsistent with the rest of their witness. Chick-fil-A can manage to survive and be a successful business without being open on the Sabbath. Why can't the Ark Encounter actually do it too? That's a question I've never really quite had answered for me. Let's stick with the Ken Ham theme. Many have said it couldn't be done. Others said it would fall if done. Others said it was a waste of money and time, including many other young Earth creationists, by the way. Others claimed it would have no impact. But for nothing will be impossible with God. Luke 1:37. With God? Well, nothing will be impossible with Ken Ham's ideas along with God. And I believe with all my heart that God called us to do it. And if that is so, then nothing could stop it. If it wasn't impossible with God and he believed that he was called to do it, then it's not possible for him to have not been successful. What's he talking about here? Well, of course, he's talking about his two big visions. I believe two historic moments in Christendom. Not two recent historic events in Christendom, but two historic moments in Christendom occurred when the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter Christian-themed attractions were opened in northern Kentucky. I'm convinced these attractions are the two of the greatest Christian outreaches of our era. Now, here he says, of our era. Then he goes on to talk about all the secularists and so forth that thought it would be dead by now and it wouldn't be successful. And it is successful in from the perspective of how the secular world define success, right? They have plenty of people, plenty of income coming in. They've been able to expand. They're continually growing. They're adding new features all the time. They essentially have the same number of individuals coming to the Ark Encounter each year. It's a good bit lower than the first year, actually the first 2 years. This past couple months have been lower than even last year by a little bit, but it's still a going business, right? It's still generating enough interest that they can continue to add to it. And of course, they've got a ton of donor dollars. And as I suggested before, they have other sources of income. All right, they got AnswersNet, NewsNet. They have all of their different videos, their books. They're going to be they got the Ark sort of conference center. So you've got other things that are now generating income for them. Those will continue to increase over time. They have their Vacation Bible School materials, all that stuff. Big income generators. And then of course they've got some really deep pocketed donations. They're still looking at, the last I checked, they were in the $15 to $20 million a year in terms of just people giving them money, right? On top of the things that they do. So they are a success in that respect. I find it interesting that he thinks these are the historic moments in Christendom, the building of the Ark and the Creation Museum. I'm not sure that would really make my top 10, even if I thought that they were, even if I thought they were good witnesses of the gospel. Sticking with Answers in Genesis and the Ark Encounter. Saw this little tweet series from the Ark Encounter, so I had to copy that. Imagine the earth as it was before the flood. The forests are lush and fertile. The air is thick, warm, and fragrant. The completed ark sits quietly on a hilltop, like a great wooden fortress. Now, I don't really see too many hills in that particular picture. This is supposed to be an image of the ark sort of ready for the animals to come to it. And this is a display at the Ark Encounter that talks about how many animals are on the ark and how only 2 of every kind came, and that's what limited the total numbers of animals on the ark. I know I'm kind of weird, but individual words strike me as interesting at times. Like, do they, well, I know they don't think too deeply about some of these things, but have they thought about the words that they say? Maybe, I don't know if do I overthink things, but the completed ark sits quietly on a hilltop like a great wooden fortress. Imagine, this is what the world before the flood looks like. There weren't any great mountains, by the way, before the flood, according to Answers in Genesis. So, you had hills, but now the ark sits on top of one of these hills. So it was like, I ask myself questions about everything. I guess I'm just weird like that. But why does it have to sit on a hilltop? I guess I could imagine it being on the hilltop. But in my mind, if I think about where would I build the ark, I don't think I might be wrong. Maybe I'm forgetting something. Maybe there's a passage in there where God commands Noah to build the ark on a hilltop. I don't think it says that. In my mind, it's a whole lot more convenient and easier to build an ark in a valley. If you build it on the hilltop, what do you have to do? You have to bring every piece of log, right? Every huge plank, right, is going to have to be transported uphill to get to the ark. That's a whole lot more work. I think it's a whole lot easier to cut down trees and roll them downhill and prep them for putting them on the ark. Just, a little just practical carpentry and building. Why make it harder than it has to be? It's already very difficult to imagine a man and his family, although presumably he contracted out and had other people help, even if they were skeptics. They needed a job. Now I'm imagining. It's like I'm definitely over imagining what happened there. But nonetheless, the idea is that really, really, really hard to get this size of timbers up a hill to make the ark on the top of a hill. Seems like a whole lot of extra work. Plus, when the flood begins, whether you're on the top of the hill or whether you're at the bottom of the valley, it's still going to float up, right? So I don't think it's necessary to build it on the top of a hill. Okay, too many words spent on that, but it's like Let's just read the other two parts of this tweet. Guided in pairs, thousands of creatures flood into the ark. Right, the word guided there is because God brought them to the ark. There are perhaps millions of species worldwide. That's a big question. How many species of organisms were there prior to the flood? That's really a question of how many individual species within a particular kind did God create? Were there already 10 different species of one kind? So when God created each kind according to Younger's creationism, did he create, boom, there's 10 species? Or did he only create one version of each kind and then they branched, bifurcated as they populated the world and turned into a variety of species, which might be millions by the time of the flood? But only selected representatives of every land-dependent air-breathing kind are sent. All right. Remember, only land-dependent air-breathing animals are on the ark. No whales on the ark, seals, and so forth. Approximately 6,744 animals. Approximately 6,744. If you're going to say approximately, you say, approximately 7,000 or 6,500 or 6,700. Assembled inside. And most are small, young, and easily kept. It's really easy. 6,700 animals, that would be easy for 8 people to take care of. These chosen animals will reestablish their kinds in the new world. Enough of that. Let's move on to more interesting items. We've been talking about this. If you've watched any of the past episodes of This Week in Creationism, I mentioned there was going to be a group that is primarily from Moscow, Idaho, that's rented the facility, the Ark Encounter meeting center, and they have met. They had their convention, their annual get-together last week. I have seen a little bit about that. I've seen a lot of behind-the-scenes type stuff. I have yet to see the actual presentations themselves, but I do have copies of a couple of the transcripts of a couple of the talks that were given there. So it turns out there was about 1,300 people that showed up for this event. I talked about how it was, $300 and something each. And another 100 and something bucks in order to get the pass, the 3-day pass to visit the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum. And many of them might have stayed in the hotel next door, which is also looks like partially owned by Answers in Genesis. So big event for Answers in Genesis in terms of a moneymaker. So this group shows up. Their theme for this year was the politics of 6-day creation. And really it was a lot of talk about politics, and in particular, talking about the merits of the idea of Christian nationalism. And you can see a couple of the speakers here. So here's a shot from inside during that event to show you the size. The scope of their convention center at the Ark Encounter. Quite the place. I'm sure, actually this is a screenshot from their Beers and Psalms night. I'm sure that knowing this group pretty well, having been around them, having been to some events myself, I'm pretty sure that vast quantities of alcohol and certainly a whole lot of cigars were smoked. That's a kind of a calling card of this particular group in terms of their Christian freedom, in order to drink a lot and smoke a lot, because, hey, that's what real Christian men do. Moving on. Let me give you a little flavor. Let me give you a little flavor of what this convention was like. This is the blog of Toby Sumter. Toby Sumter is an assistant pastor at a church in Moscow, Idaho. Same church that Douglas Wilson's at, who's sort of the grand poobah of the organization. And he has posted 2 transcripts of talks that he gave at this event called the Fight, Laugh, Feast event at the Ark Encounter. So in this case, this is what he called the Fight, Laugh, Feast Manifesto from the 2023 convention. And you can think of this as kind of like the benediction to the whole thing, the last thing that's said as everyone departs. So what was the flavor of this convention? What types of language would you hear there? All right, so let me read this, just the first couple paragraphs of this charge given to the 1,300 people who attended this event. I'm not sure I can really read it in the kind of bombastic, really confident way that this speaker does, but I'll give it a bit of a shot. For too long, the Christian church has cowered. We have cowered before false gods and false religions and false priesthoods. And while there have always been attempts at bullying God's people, the modern version of this has come in the form of so-called secularism. But this secularism is every bit as religious as the Baals and Dagons and Zeuses of the ancient world, with high priests bowing and scraping at the altars of Darwinism, materialism, and every form of Marxism, including the more recent critical theories aimed at shaming Christians for the way God has made the world. The high priests of these false gods and religions have pontificated their incantations, claiming big bangs and billions of years of violence and mutations. They have written long, bloviating papers for which they have given one another accolades and awards, calling one another brave and brilliant while chirping and muttering with complete insanity, claiming that people evolved from shrimp, that there's no creator God, no meaning, no truth, and anybody who thinks otherwise is a threat to academia, intelligence, freedom, and democracy. When asked for proof, they claimed that it was in the geological record. It was not. They claimed that it was in the fossil record. It was not. They claimed it was proven by the black cauldron of radiocarbon dating. It was not. And when the music played, everyone bowed down, afraid of the consequences, afraid of the mockery, afraid of being canceled, or simply afraid of looking dumb. And it just goes on and on and on from there. Anyway, that's sort of the language that really all the talks follow at this place. Ken Ham also gave a talk there, and I'm hoping to be able to get some access to some of those talks and be able to analyze them a little bit more in the future. I'm really interested to see how Ken Ham related to this particular group, whether he just gave sort of his boilerplate talk. But I think you can see in the language here, this is a lot of what Ken Ham says. It's just in a much more, sort of prose form, a much louder, more direct form that even Ken Ham would use. Although I think Ken Ham would probably appreciate and agree with everything that's said here. So, and I was thinking before this began, I thought, well, they're just renting the facility. Ken Ham doesn't really have anything to do with this. I don't know if there's any real connection there. But I will surmise there is a little bit more of a connection than I originally thought. This is the flight activity history for the jet N190JK, which is the jet that is partially owned. And I don't know how they break down like the overall usage of this. So here's some recent flights that this jet took. So I can't say that they were all Answers in Genesis individuals that were on these jets. But I will note that on October 13th, which was the last day, the very end of, after the end of the last day of this convention, the jet did take off from right there next door at the airport, which is not far away from the Ark Encounter, and went to Nebraska, and then it went to Idaho. All right, and then swung around back through its normal stopping point for some reason in Oklahoma. And that particular route, suggests to me that they're actually using the Answers in Genesis to transport some individuals from the convention back, probably some speakers, back to Idaho. All right, I'm also just showing this to show you that Answers in Genesis, they have a jet, right? Ken Ham can fly around, and go see people in the private jet that they have access to. Okay, let's get a little more serious. So I want to spend a little time reading you some portions of a Journal of Creation. So actually, we're not just all Answers in Genesis today. Let's go to creation.com. Journal of Creation from August 2022. So this is a year ago now, but this was only recently highlighted on their, I think it was highlighted on their webpage, but definitely on their Twitter and Facebook page And that's where I noted it, and I hadn't seen this article before. Journal of Creation, just like some of the other journals, they don't release all of their articles immediately upon publishing because they want you to pay for it. So they have to give some access to paying customers, and then they sort of gradually release them to the public, and so that way they can populate their web page with new articles and new information. So this popped up and I found it kind of interesting. Warren Shipton is now I'm trying to remember now. I looked it up. That was a few days ago. I got to write these things down because I have such horrible memory. I believe he's an engineer though. Yeah, let me read you some portions of this article. The marring of creation and some implications for ecosystem functioning. And I was interested in this because I've been thinking a lot about, and I do think a lot about, what would the original creation have been prior to Adam mucking it up, right? Marring the creation. What would that have looked like? Like, as a biologist, I think about ecosystems. I think about ecosystem functioning. I think about genetics. I think about mutations. I think about the process of copying a cell and what happens when one copies it. How could one copy it perfectly? Is that even possible? So what does it mean to have a perfect creation? And I plan on doing a lot of talk about this in the future in separate videos. But this will give you a little tiny taste for it, because let me show you a little bit of the vision from somebody here at Creation Ministries International. God's judgment regarding human moral fail resulted in partial loss of genomic stability, replication fidelity, and soil fertility. I'm jumping in it I'm a couple paragraphs down. He's been discussing all right, Adam sinned. We know from the Bible that it says something about that mars the creation. Yeah, it's a big discussion about what exactly does that mean. Did it change the physical creation? Beyond Adam, and even did it even change Adam in terms of a physical sense, or is it simply spiritually? Right? We're not getting into all that. We're going to go with what Answers in Creation Ministry International is doing, which is they're assuming a perfect creation, and that the way things work today is not the way things worked prior to Adam's bringing sin into the world and this corruption. So God's judgment resulted in a partial loss of genomic stability. Can't say full loss of genomic stability, or none of us would be here, right? A replication fidelity. Okay, now that goes to the genetics, all right, to the DNA stuff. Yeah, mutations started to happen. To them, no mutations prior to the fall. Genomes apparently copied themselves with 100% fidelity. Never made a mistake. And then he's skipping over to ecological thing, soil fertility. Somehow soils were completely fertile prior to Adam's sin, and then they lost fertility. They weren't as good for growing things in. Now, what would it look to have a perfect soil that doesn't lose fertility? I'm going to get myself distracted several times here, but soil fertility. So what makes soil fertile? Well, having a whole bunch of nutrients in, a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus and all the things that plants need to grow, plus plenty of aeration, oxygenated, maybe some bacteria in there, nitrogen fixers and so forth. So how would that be maintained constantly if organisms were always growing out of soil? How is that replenished? How is it recycled? In addition, there were climate and topographic changes. The climate changed after Adam sinned. Climate was different. Topographic changes? Well, it goes back to there was just rolling hills and there wasn't a lot of erosion, because if there was a lot of erosion, that would damage the soils and then the organisms couldn't grow as well. So it wouldn't be as fertile, right? So that couldn't have happened before the fall. You couldn't have had a lot of erosion. But clearly there were streams, right? But those streams must have been contained to not do much damage to the world. So just very subtle slopes. All right. So reducing the amount of erosion. Although I can't even say the word reduce, right? Because if I say reduce, it makes it sound like there was some erosion. Was erosion allowed at all? Could any particle move from one place to another? Doesn't that disrupt things? Oh, because the questions abound. There's so many. Altered interactions between organisms, and ultimately death was experienced. Brief statements as to the nature of the changes following the fall are given in the first 9 chapters of Genesis. These alterations may be explained, at least partially, by reference to aberrations in the translation of genetic information, changes to regulatory elements, and the rare transfer of genetic information between organisms, horizontal gene transfer. This is not to discount the possibility of intelligent beings contributing to unsatisfactory outcomes. That's not to say that we also didn't mess things up even more, all right? Like we are today with genetic engineering and all the things that we do that are fouling up organisms. But clearly the first 100, 200 years, we didn't do as much. But we may have tried to cross things that should have been crossed and try to manipulate organisms the way in unnatural ways. The curses pronounced on the earth led to changes in ecosystem functioning too. Population control now variously depends on predation, obligatory carnivorism, sanguivore, destructive competition, and devastation caused by diseases and pest species. Suggestions are made concerning the phenomena operating before the fall to ensure population control and ecological balance. Right. So this is essentially a portion of the abstract here. Wow. I'm intrigued. He's going to suggest how the phenomena operating before the fall ensured population control and environmental balance. Yes, I want to know that. How were environments ecologically balanced when there couldn't be like competition, there couldn't be any death, there couldn't be any loss of any different species, and yet populations were growing? Like, how do populations continue to grow and not change the environment for the other organisms? How was population, was there population control? He's suggesting there was. Populations were limited. I mean, they were told to go forth and reproduce, right? Fill the world, fill the land. Now he's going to say later, yes, but once they start to fill the land, once they get close to having filled it, that was the end point. So the God created a beginning point where there weren't many organisms and said, now you go out and fill the world. And then, but once the world's filled, he's pretty much going to admit you can't have a world that has too many organisms, or they're going to affect each other too much. And if you don't have any death, we know you're going to have like an ecological problem. It's going to be really hard to have balance. So he's going to suggest that there's natural controls that populations would have slowed down their growth and eventually stopped. And that would have been like the ultimate goal of creation, is to get to that point. And we never got there because of sin. But that's what the original plan was, to start with a few, grow it up to the amount that the world can handle that God created, and then somehow stop that population growth. Right? Somehow the command no longer is necessary at that point. Right? So, yeah, this is, I'm intrigued. What's going to happen here? The dynamics underpinning balanced ecosystem functioning are reasonably well understood today. In such systems, predatory, carnivorous activity, destructive competition, disease, crowding, and the impact of extreme environmental events are recognized as playing a significant role in population control. I totally agree. All those things are factors that affect population growth and may actually create a carrying capacity of an environment. A carrying capacity would be like, here's the total, the greatest number of organisms that of a particular species that can survive in this particular environment, given all these other things that are happening, like all this other competition or lack of resources. How population control was organized in the beginning, in the absence of these phenomena, right? There wasn't any predators, there's no carnivory, there wasn't any destructive competition. Organisms didn't compete with each other. I don't know how thousands of organisms can live in a small space and somehow not compete. I mean, one of them's going to eat that blade of grass and another one's not going to be able to eat that blade of grass. It's just like, how is that not competition? If one gets it and the other one doesn't, one gets food and the other one doesn't get food. I guess you could argue they didn't really need food, right? Because they couldn't die, right? If they can't die, then, I mean, yes, there's food, but maybe they could survive for 1,000 years without food. And they just need to eat food every once in a while. I guess that would reduce competition, right? So, okay, there's a hypothesis. I just generated a hypothesis for y'all young Earth creationists out there. Maybe you only need one meal every 10,000 years. That was enough to keep you going. And so therefore, the plants of the world could provide an immense amount of resource, for very large populations. Given the assurance that all creation is dependent on the sustenance provided at the hand of God, possible answers are provided. What are those possible answers going to be? I'm skipping through here. We're just hitting the highlights of this article. So to give myself a chance to give you some ideas that I've had and things that I've been interacting with. Changes come. The scene that greeted Adam and Eve on Creation Day drew to a close was majestic and tranquil. Yeah, there's no real serious disruptions in the environment, right? Everything is quiet. It's humid. It's kind of like that quote I read earlier, that tweet, like, imagine that Noah's Ark is, it's a humid environment and the birds are singing. Since they were in a special garden, we might reference the great gardens of today's world as the lowest point in our imagination. We should not think that there was a single terrestrial ecosystem in the beginning. The earth was filled with vegetation from the third day, and a special garden was established by God. He's right? The Garden of Eden is, how would you tell the Garden of Eden was different than other places? Well, it must have had somewhat different plants, all right? It had to be different. It had to be a different ecosystem. I happen to think the Garden of Eden is distinguished by the presence of God, and that's more of, and the type of organization and who is in charge of it that makes it different than other locations. But, they're thinking very literally and physically. All right, the Garden of Eden has to have different plants or something different about it physically, besides just the presence of Adam and Eve and God. The existence of varied ecosystems might be argued to have existed from the beginning. Specialized plants capable of flourishing at different altitudes and latitudes were undoubtedly created in the beginning, as they have unique features. Well, yeah, duh. I mean, it's like, this is an admission that the North Pole and the equator, even in the original creation, would probably have some differences in terms of climate. Certainly the amount of daylight you're going to experience, the amount of sunshine, the amount of moisture, there's going to have to be some differences there. Now, most creationists downplay these differences as being minor, right? Can't have extremes, because if you have extremes, well then, are you really going to have ice caps? Are you going to have deserts? Are you going to, if you have those things, then you're also going to have significant weather, because those create heat and cold, which just interact in the environment. Whoa, okay, see, now here's as soon as you start thinking about this stuff, it gets all crazy, because how could you not have weather patterns? How could you not have storms, right? How is that suppressed? Which is why most creationists tend to want to try to make everything just like this warm, fuzzy globe where everything is just hot, humid, and still and stagnant, because you can't have wind and so forth. Wind might knock down trees, which might land on animals and kill them, or so you're trying to get rid of every natural force that could cause any problem. But it just makes a bland world, really, honestly. Back to this. Furthermore, if the river Euphrates, mentioned in Genesis 2:14, corresponds even remotely with the present-day river, it doesn't. Not according to all young Earth creationists I've read. They talk about there being a giant flood that covered the entire world, covering it with thousands of feet of sediments, and then eroding those sediments and having mountains formed and volcanoes and all kinds of stuff. The Middle East is nothing like the topography of the Middle East would be nothing like the topography that it is today. All right, the original created topography. So I don't even know why he's speculating about the river Euphrates here, but he's talking about like, okay, well, the Euphrates had a number of ecosystems it would have encountered over its length. Well, yes. I mean, if you have a long river, it must have started at a higher elevation. It's moving toward a more lower elevation, also latitudes. All right, maybe a higher latitude, working its way south. So you would expect some differences. The soil's got to change, right? Got to be different. The particle sizes, all right, in the sediments that are deposited by the river. Well, assuming there was erosion, right? But maybe there wasn't erosion. I mean, erosion is a breaking down of what was present in one place and moving it to another, right? It's a disruption of the original creation. This is why these types of questions, things that make you go, it just, it's hard to make any sense of a world that is perfect, right? Which doesn't experience any change, but obviously there was change. But once there is change, how do you control that change such that it doesn't, it just breaks my mind to think about what this world would have looked like. Even if this idea is disallowed, river systems require a source higher than the mouth, suggesting varied ecosystems along their course. Yeah, okay. Yep, that's great. Whoa, let's skip down to some molecular mechanisms. All right, so we've established, right, this comfy world in which, yes, he's trying to argue that there was variation. There was ecosystem variation. Different locations experience different conditions. So there would have been different created kinds of organisms for those different environments. But they were all a perfect set for this environment, a perfect set for another environment. And I don't know what happened if the environment would have changed over time, how those animals would have still remained perfect for those environments. But maybe they had perfect amounts of variation that could be explored. But then as soon as you have variation, you have natural selection. But how does natural selection work if you don't have death? I mean, the questions abound. Yeah, let's get, this gets better. This gets better. With snake venoms, it has been postulated, right? This is a big question all the time for creation. Where did death-causing features come from in organisms? Because they seem really well designed, right? The venomous snakes seem super well designed to kill. And yet in that perfect world, they didn't kill. So this is the constant quest, is to find hypotheses to explain this. I like this one. This one's really fascinating to me. In snake venoms, it's been postulated that some venoms might have arisen from non-toxic genes that performed a number of cellular tasks around the body. Highly venomous snakes appear to have more copies of the venom genes than do non-venomous snakes, like pythons. Yes, this is true. I mean, this is right out of the secular literature. Venomous snakes do have more copies of the genes that make venom, right? Those genes that make enzymes that create biochemical pathways to produce the various chemicals that are the venoms, right? Snakes that are venomous have additional copies of genes that make products that make these venoms. And those are additional copies of other genes that make slightly different forms of chemicals that aren't as venomous or have different tasks in other parts of the body. So, for example, in the gut, there's a different copy of the gene expresses a protein, an enzyme into the gut lining that breaks down food. But that gene copied into the saliva produces a toxin that when the snake bites another animal, even if it's not squirting it or injecting it, maybe it just has in its saliva, it can then get that toxin into that host, right, into that other organism and kill it. Oh, let me read on because he's going to explain this. The theory underlying this proposal suggests that the protovenom genes were first expressed at low levels in many tissues, including the oral secretory glands. And this was followed by higher expression levels for some genes in these glands and a small number of other tissues. So maybe in the original creation, there were several genes and they were expressed in like multiple different tissues, but maybe at low levels that weren't as toxic, right? The organism didn't kill itself, but it helps for maybe digestion, right? Breaking down food. And that was expressed in the saliva. And then they upregulated or caused themselves to produce more of that after Adam's sin. Somehow this changed the actual genes, right, in the snake. And now they started to make much more in their mouths to the point where it's toxic if that were to touch other organisms. But now the highlighted blue section here. To enable these changes in the saliva, gene duplication and further mutation in one of the duplicated strands could have occurred, and exon shuffling may have also been involved. These are all things that have been shown to probably be true, right? These are all the secular explanations for the origins of venom. Right? There's a set of genes that like all snakes have, and actually several other reptiles, right? They're related to snakes. And those genes are expressed in multiple different tissues in the body, have a variety of different jobs, right? Involved in breaking things down or absorbing things, or in defense in terms of kind of think of it as like immune system type responses. And so the idea is that in the snakes that become venomous, they've taken genes and they've copied those genes. So now they have 2 copies. That way they can make more of that product. And they've also maybe turned on that gene only in the mouth, and it's not turned on anywhere else. And then they have mutations, and those mutations cause those particular enzymes to make slightly different biochemical pathways, which then make even more venomous material, right? Or they actually make a protein that is venom itself. And by tweaking that particular protein, you can make it more venomous. Then there's this whole thing about how you get it in the teeth and how you end up either squirting it or injecting it, right? And all of those are actually gene mutations on different parts of the tooth anatomy. But fascinating, all right? I want to focus your attention again on what this author is doing. This author is saying there might have been an original gene that God made that was innocuous in terms of like it did a function that it would have done in the original Garden of Eden, right? Or in the original world, in the original ecosystem that just helped the organism eat its food, which wasn't apparently other animals because they couldn't kill other animals. So they ate plants, and somehow maybe these genes helped absorb more nutrients from that. And then after the fall, they had gene duplications, copied the genes. So now they have more copies of the genes. I would say they have more genes because after they've mutated one copy of the gene, that gene now has a new function. It makes a new product that the other gene didn't make. By the way, that's an increase of information. That's a really nice, simple example of how an organism's genome can increase the amount of total information. Not only does it have an extra gene, but it's also expressed in a different location than the other things are. So that organism is now able to do something it couldn't do before. And it did it as a result of duplication, which is itself as a mutation. And then it mutated that particular duplicate, causing it to function differently. Then he goes on to say, increase in the expression of venom genes can also be theoretically linked to suggested changes in regulatory sequences. Yes, there are sequences on around the gene where transcription factors and other regulatory proteins can influence how that gene's turned on. And like maybe it influences, it only turns on inside of a tooth cavity, right? Only inside the gums or at the base of the tooth, right? Nowhere else. Well, what does that change? What does this author think that change is? That's a mutation, right? And how does he think these mutations happened? Out of all the millions and billions of possible mutations that could happen, only certain ones are going to cause these particular actions. Were these somehow directed? Did God just like make these mutations happen? Certainly, creationists can resonate with the idea that proto-genes may have been present in the beginning where they serve useful design purposes. And that gene duplication and other targeted changes, God targeted certain sites through some unknown mechanism, or did he just do miracles, like a whole bunch of individual miracles, change that base to that, change that base to and that promoter so that now that gene gets turned on a different location. Let me copy this piece of DNA and put another piece over here. Was that a miracle or somehow a natural process that occurred doing that? That gene duplication and other targeted sequence changes occurred following the curse. So somehow Adam sinned and that caused a gene duplication. And that gene duplication then had a bunch of targeted mutations such that those mutations were only expressed in particular tissues in the mouth of a snake so that they could make venom, so that they could kill. So that allows them to function in this new altered ecosystem where apparently they didn't have any plants to eat, so they had to start eating animals. All right. And yet all this is not the original design, and yet it was the original design. That's the kooky thing that's the hard thing to grasp is this is still designed because it's targeted and it's a plan, but that's not the original plan, in creation. Okay, we got two more slides. All right, going on with some other molecular mechanisms. Other organisms can be involved in gene transfer. For example, the transfer of DNA between a bacterium and a yeast has been recorded in culture. And I've done a whole video on an entire group of genes that has been moved from one bacteria into a group of yeast. And that yeast, and it's not this particular example, by the way, that yeast then has an entire metabolic pathway that it didn't have before. And so it can produce a product that helps it get iron, scavenge iron from its environment that no other type of fungi can do. Only this one particular group. And that group clearly got that group of genes from other bacteria. That's horizontal gene transfer, transferring from one type of organism to another, right? Such that there's a new property in the genome of that fungus now. I think that's another pretty clear example of a change in the amount of, I hate the word information, but I know young earth creationists use it all the time, so I'll use it here. A change in the amount of information available to that particular organism. It's conceivable that related events could occur in natural situations such as biofilms. Where there's organisms that are interacting with each other, maybe they could transfer genes from one to another. And then there's this great line, right? It's like, here this author is suggesting a bunch of what any evolutionary biologist has already suggested as ways that organisms adapt and change and actually gain new characteristics, right? New traits. Venom is a new trait compared to non-venomous snakes. And how do they become venomous? By taking genes that were already in the non-venomous snake, duplicating them, and adapting them for the venomous characteristic. All right, but so it's like he knows that he's like pretty close to like accepting an awful lot of evolution. And if he was writing for Answers in Genesis, this would be a little scary because he might be called a young earth evolutionist by Ken Ham and others. So got to throw in this caveat. It is important to note that the organism receiving the new information is still abundantly recognizable and is not transformed into something different. It's not a new kind. It's just gotten a new characteristic, but it's still clearly a fungus, right? And it's clearly still Saccharomyces. Evolution as viewed by modern science is not illustrated in these examples. Okay. Okay, I know this sounded like evolution, especially since this is the actual evolutionist explanation for how snakes became venomous and how different venomous species can be understood and why we can actually understand why they have different venoms because they've altered those particular duplicated genes in different ways. But no. That is not evolution, even though I just completely absconded with the evolutionary explanation, because that's not molecules becoming man, right? That's just a shift and change in the characteristics of a particular kind, right? But it's still gaining new characteristics, right? Clearly is. He's admitting that venomous snakes have changed and come from non-venomous snakes and that they have actual genes that they didn't have originally, right? Because they've duplicated them. Several options have been outlined by John Morris, grandfather of, we'll say, modern creationism. Namely, features were present originally, maybe benign, that would later be needed. The genome contained the potential to be changed by the forces of nature and by selection to give rise to carnivory, organisms designed to suit environmental conditions as a function of survivability, or the sinister forces of evil led by Lucifer were somehow involved. Like maybe maybe Satan himself actually has the tools to be able to genetically engineer things. Like God's given him the ability to go in and tinker with our genomes. Like maybe Satan actually causes mutations. Like is going in there and saying, mutate this, mutate this, mutate this, duplicate this gene, make it mutate so that this thing can make venom now, which then will be dangerous to human beings. So it's a way of attacking people. I wasn't successful with Adam in terms of I was very successful with Adam, but he was given a promise to eventually, give rise to a savior. But I'm still going to muck around with human beings by altering the organisms around them so that his life will be very difficult. And maybe that's part of God's curse, right? God cursed the land and cursed the ground, cursed all these animals. And part of that curse is allowing Satan to do that work. Kind of like in Job, where maybe there was a conversation and Satan comes to God and says, I'll bet that if you allow me to, mess around with nature and make it really unpalatable and make it difficult for man to live, that they won't actually seek you out. And God says, challenge accepted, but I'm still going to bring those who are mine to me. Whew. Wow, I'm going down some interesting tangents today. In the study of ecosystems of isolated islands devoid of mammal predators, a situation is observed somewhat resembling the stability envisioned in the beginning. I don't think it's somewhat resembling at all, right? He's going to say that, hey, look, there's some islands where there are no predators. And in that situation, there is something that they kind of stabilize their populations. And that's kind of like it was in the beginning. It's nothing like it was in the beginning. There was no death, according to young Earth creationists, in the beginning. That population didn't stabilize in any form or fashion in the same way that it would now. There's so many different ecosystem rules that organisms are obeying today that are the outcomes of organisms competing with one another, right? And natural selection and mutations happening and all of that. Right? None of that is he's said at the very beginning, doesn't occur. It didn't occur in the original creation. In such situations, mammalian predatory activity is unnecessary for the maintenance of population balance. It is true that in some of these situations, losses and gains of species may be experienced due to the pressures of food supply or to predation by invertebrates. But a dynamic equilibrium occurs over time. Yeah, so he just turns right around and admits that, yeah, there could be pressures due to food supply, right? But I know he's not going to say that in the original creation there was a problem with food supply and therefore organisms couldn't survive, right? Or they didn't have to compete with one another, right? Well-balanced components of vegetation were established initially to cover the earth, with the planned starting fauna added later. Now he's going to appeal to the fact that God created all the plants first, and then he placed animals there, and all the plants were ready. And so the fauna seeded right into the existing ecosystems were meant to multiply, meaning there would have to be a succession as they spread throughout the terrain. Finally, a homeostatic state would have been reached in the absence of mammalian predators. A homeostatic state via what mechanism? Tell me about the mechanisms here. How did a homeostatic state arrive? I mean, if all those organisms are multiplying and they've been told to fill the world and they start copying each other, how do you reach homeostasis? I'd really like to know that. Once the state had been attained, its continuance would have been dependent on population control. Well, heck yes, right? If populations are continuing to grow, there's going to be competition. There's going to be natural selection. There's going to be, well, I mean, if there are no mutations, there's no variation in the population. They're all just replicating clones of themselves, but eventually they're just bumping into each other. And I don't know, I don't even know if the grass can grow at some point if you have so many animals pushing up against each other that the sun can't hit the ground. But he's saying there's population control. The actual number of offspring produced, fertility, and natural ability to reproduce, fecundity, has profound effects on the survival of plants and animals. Yes, yeah, absolutely. In the beginning, these features were designed to enable population increase to occur in planned manner through the various ecosystems existing. Somehow there was a plan. Here's the number of animals, and they will grow at a certain rate given the amount of material been provided for them in the original creation. In the beginning, as can be anticipated, there were multiple dispersal centers representing different ecosystems that were seeded with animals, birds, and other life forms at creation. Multiplication was mandated, remember. This would have ensured the functioning of the ecosystem moving forward to a planned final state. I found this interesting. I rarely, if ever, hear any young earth creationists talk about this. So there was a beginning state that was not the final state, right? There was a beginning state that was not meant to stay exactly as it is, hence the command to fill, right? To multiply. But so that implies then that there is a final state. So now he takes this, like there's an initial state and there's a final state, and then there's something that happens in between, right? Nevertheless, in order to reach this state, a succession conceivably occurred as the creature spread out and occupied virgin vegetated terrain. There's animals, they're reproducing, they're meeting new area. They're not only just reproducing one area, but they're expanding, right? Geographically. And they have more things to eat. So I guess there's so much food they don't have to compete with each other. At some point, reproductive activity in the fauna would necessarily have to have been slowed to achieve the balance planned. So God had a plan for the number total that there would be eventually. So the initial state, they're told to multiply, but nearer to the final state, apparently that command must be taken back, or would have been taken back, planned, and then terminated, as with no death as an option in feeling organisms. That's a really important phrase there, feeling organisms. This is the creationist way of saying that insects could have died, maybe even, a lot of small ocean critters could have died, worms could have died, and so forth. It's only maybe vertebrates, right, that didn't die, which creates a whole other set of really complicated things to think about, like how you could have a complete ecosystem of organisms that are dying and decomposing and regenerating and competing with each other. And obviously natural selection must be happening. Like, how do you not have natural selection happening? How would you stop that? All right. And that's happening with like 75% or 90% of all the organisms on Earth. There are things that we kind of think of as alive from a scientific sense. And then there's these vertebrate organisms that are operating on a completely different form of biology. No competition. They can't, right? There's no natural selection. They can't die, right? So what controls their populations, and how would they end? How would they stop growing? All of those are like really weird questions when the rest of the world is behaving in some way that like it does today. Substantial changes in the physical environment, either seasonally or with the passage of time, are not thought to have occurred. He's saying like, well, we don't think there was really seasons, and there wasn't huge changes in the ecology. So therefore, what was it? How are these organisms? How are they held at bay? And his solution is that somehow they were brought into balance where they weren't able to multiply anymore, and they just reached a happy medium. The grass grows this fast, and the sheep keep eating it. Grass continues to grow, sheep keep eating it, but there aren't any more sheep, so therefore it can get into some kind of homeostatic situation. except that all the other organisms, I mean, what stops fungi and bacteria and insects from continuing to replicate and then consuming all the material? Right? They're competing with each other. They could create huge shifts and changes in the ecology since they're not operating by the same rules that vertebrates are. All right, this is been going on. This is a long time now. Sorry, I'm over an hour. A couple light items. All right, to end this. Saw this in a what was it? I think it was a Facebook group actually, and this is one of those gotcha slides, that somebody shows and says like, "Look, evolution can't be true. I mean, how can you possibly answer this question?" I thought this was interesting because it's kind of a different take on a misconception. Yeah, it's like a whole new kind of misconception on top of another misconception. Because everyone's seen something like this before, where there's like chimps changing into a human being, right? You have chimpanzees and then they gradually change into a human, as if it was just like this linear series of change. But of course, no evolutionary biologist says that chimpanzees changed into humans. A common ancestor changed, had offspring that eventually became populations that became chimpanzees, and another set adapted in a different way to become human beings. So chimps are not evolving into humans, and humans aren't evolving into chimps, according to the standard evolutionary theory. So this picture is wrong to begin with. All right. But this adds a whole new twist on it. If the theory of evolution were true, where is the millions of these, right? We've got, as they're saying, we've got millions of these animals here on the left, which I presume that's a chimpanzee. So there's millions of those. We've got millions of those out there. Actually, there's not millions, but there's a lot of them. And we've got millions of human beings, right? So where's the millions of animals between? Where are they? Does this person know anything about the fossil record? Right? Do you really expect that? Well, there's millions of human beings. Are there millions of fossils of human beings? No. Are there millions of fossils of chimpanzees? Like, how many chimpanzee fossils can you name? There are chimpanzee fossils, by the way, in case you're wondering. Some of you might be thinking, "Oh, I don't think there are any." No, there are some, but it's not on the order of millions or hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands, right? It's on the order of maybe a couple hundred. And I don't think there's a couple hundred like whole individuals, like a couple hundred samples. Right? It's not very many. Right? So although there are millions alive and there are millions of human beings alive, the number of fossils is many fewer. So what would you expect of any organism, even if this whole description of chimpanzees becoming humans is wrong anyway? But let's say there's hominid ancestors, Homo naledi and Homo erectus and Australopithecines and things like that, right? Yes, we don't have that many representatives of them, but that doesn't mean there weren't millions of all those different species as well at one point in time. We simply don't have many preserved for us, just like the chances that you will be preserved 100,000 years in the future is pretty slim, right? 7 billion people on Earth, how many of those will become fossilized? Not a whole lot of them. So I just, this is just a really ridiculous graphic in so many different ways. Last up, Marjorie Taylor Greene. The Earth spins at roughly 1,000 miles per hour. We have no idea we're even moving. Don't ever let anyone tell you God's not real. Right? This would not be my go-to proof of God. I just would, right? The Earth spins at roughly 1,000 miles per hour. We have no idea we're even moving. Well, how does she know that we're moving at 1,000 miles per hour? I mean, somebody figured that out, right? I know she doesn't, believe a whole lot of science, but I don't know any other way to figure out that the Earth is spinning 1,000 miles per hour other than some scientist figuring that out. And she seems to accept that the Earth spins 1,000 miles an hour. She's right that our perception is that we're not moving. I don't know. It's just crazy logic. I thought that was kind of a funny one. All right, that's it. That's it for this week in creationism. I'm working on a bunch of stuff. Very little of it related to this blog, but I am working on a project for my genetics lab. And it's a bioinformatics thing. And I'm thinking of making a video for my class in terms of like how to find genes in the genome and looking at variants and haplotypes and using a bunch of different resources for that. And so if I make that video, I think I'm gonna make it in such a way that I can also put it on this YouTube channel. So that's the one thing that's a big priority for me in the next week. Other than that, I've got some other papers that have come out. I might do like, just me just talking about some papers that came out, what I think the significance of them is. And I also want to get started talking about the Levant region. Yep, so been busy, and we'll see what happens in the next couple months. Hopefully some time will free up around Thanksgiving after that, and I'll get back to some more regular programming, plus maybe some material that's been more developed, thought through, and I'll make some more sophisticated videos than me just blabbing about the things that I see each day. That's it. Thanks a lot. Talk to you later.